Um, well, you all know Mark well, um, as a longtime member of the church and as somebody who has done several presentations for us in the past. And if you missed them or wanted to review them, three of his presentations are on the church's YouTube website. So the First Church in Belmont, if you go to YouTube and uh, look for the First Church in Belmont, you'll find them there. Uh, so today, Mark is going to be talking about growing up on the reef. And so, Mark, I will let you go ahead and start your talk.
All right. Oops, let me that and that and that. Did that work? Yes. Okay. Hi. Right. For those who don't know, I'm an avid scuba diver and underwater photographer. I do 2 or 3 trips a year to the tropics. And it's just a hobby, but I've really gotten into it and studying fish and then something of an amateur ichthyologist at this point. Um, but I was originally attracted by just how beautiful things are. This photo is a reef in Fiji. And while not every reef has this many fish on it, this isn't actually unusual either. To have 1,000 fish in view from a dozen or more species. Anyway, today I wanted to talk a little bit about um, how fish change as they grow up. And I'm going to keep the biology to a minimum. It's mostly about the pictures, but a very quick little bit of biology, just to make sure you know the basics here. Um, so fish hatch from eggs. The eggs, for most fish, the eggs are tiny, microscopic, and float in the water. Um, the eggs generally take anywhere from couple days to a week or more to hatch, and they hatch into a larval phase, which is also really tiny. I mean, they have to start slightly smaller than the egg, and um, the larval stage may last anywhere from a couple of weeks to a month or two. Um, Larval fish float with the plankton, generally last until the fish is maybe an inch or more, um, at which point the fish transition and start to look more like um, regular fish and go from floating with the plankton to being more active swimmers and will find an appropriate habitat to live in instead of just floating in the open ocean. And those are the juveniles. Juvenile stage can last um, varying length of time, but eventually um, fish that survives will grow up into the adult form, which is what we're most familiar with. And eventually adults get together and spawn and create more eggs and start over. So that's the life cycle. Um, to let's see. So just a few shots of fish spawning here. So like that photo I started with, this is a reef with clouds of fish over them. This was shot in late afternoon, and a lot of fish spawn at that time. So as you're approaching twilight, let's see if my cursor show. Yeah. So like there's this group of fish here, another here, and the third here. These are ones that are actually spawning. What happens is these fish that are in large numbers around the reef, um, it's certain times that they know it's spawning time, and often their color is intensified and the behavior changes a little, and the actual spawning is very quick. And a group of them form a tight ball and swim upward away from the reef, and poof, it's done. Um, Unfortunately, I don't have video of it, but this is kind of what it looks like for the smaller fish. Um, Another example, this fish is a bumphead parrotfish. It's one of the larger fish on the reef. These are 3.5 to 4 feet long and weigh a couple 100 pounds. So a big fish. Um, Not very common. So you tend to be lucky to see one, and sometimes you see groups of 8 or 10. When I was diving in Palau a couple of years ago, this shot has over 100 of those fish in it. They're deeper than I wanted to swim, so I'm like 100 feet over them. But so these fish all gather in a huge group to spawn. But again, it's very similar to what I was showing with those 1 or 2 inch long fish. They'll then form a tight group and swim upward. Um, Generally, a female shows she's ready. A bunch of males will follow. They swim up. They make a really tight group like this. And at some point, you see a little cloudy spot in the middle. That's releasing eggs and sperm. And that, so that's another way that spawning can look. I don't have any pictures of eggs, but the larval phase, larval fish generally are all or mostly transparent. They often have odd shapes. They'll have fins that stick out and such. Um, this picture here is a wrasse. This isn't technically larval. This is would be called post-larval. It's one that is just settled out of the plankton. But that's similar to how a lot of larval fish look. Um, Another one, this is a cardinal fish. But again, the larval ones tend to be transparent, very little color, um, and often are up high in the water, not next to the substrate or anything. This photo is not one of mine. This one I stole off the net, but this is an actual larval fish. I forget, this is actually one of the larger game fish. Um, but this photo is of something that's probably a 1/4 inch long. And these, when you hear about plankton, a part of a large part of what makes up the plankton are larval fish and other sea creatures, and tiny microscopic animals just floating near the ocean surface. So I'm not really here to talk about larval fish. I just wanted to complete the life cycle. Um, mate, this first part, I want to talk about juveniles. So the juveniles are the young fish that have now settled um, on a coral reef or in another area like that that start to look more like familiar fish. This particular photo is actually an adult. This is a redfin butterfly fish, which is common in a lot of the Indo-Pacific. So this is the adult. The juvenile looks like this. So it's actually fairly similar to the adult. Um, Colors aren't as intense, but the pattern is similar. And for a number of fish, this is what the juveniles look like. It's kind of a small version of the adult. There may be a few subtle changes in the color pattern. It's someone who's looked at a lot of fish. You can recognize a juvenile um, the same way puppies have large feet and big eyes. Um, Young fish have big fins and large eyes. You just learn to kind of recognize the proportions are a little off, is one way you can tell. Um, so another fish, this one is a freckled hawkfish. This is an adult. You see the red freckles on the face, which is where the name comes from. They spend all their time perched on coral. The juvenile of the freckled hawkfish looks like this. Again, it's kind of just a small adult. The colors aren't as bright, but it still does have some freckles. It's a smaller fish and it's behaving kind of like an adult. So, yeah, a lot of fish are like that. Here, yes, this is not a fish. You may have noticed that. Just pointing out that fish aren't unique in the animal kingdom, in the young ones looking a little different than the adults. You probably all would recognize this is a fawn, a young deer, because of the white spots. So there are animals for whom the young have different color pattern than the adults too. This is not unique to fish, although it's true of a lot of fish that the young are different. Um, Going back to fish, some fish, the juveniles are a lot different from the adults. Um, so this one is a regal angelfish. um, Probably 4 or 5 inches. It's typical for adults on this, with this really striking color pattern. The juveniles of this have different colors. So it's mostly yellow, but we still have a stripe pattern and it's drawn from the same palette. So um, we're not as much like a small adult, but you can still see the resemblance, and like the lines on the face are the same. And a number of fish are like this. For another example, this one is a saddled butterfly fish. Fairly large for a butterfly fish. These probably get to be 6 or 7 inches. Most striking feature is that big black patch on the back, which is where the name saddled comes from. This is the juvenile saddled butterfly fish. So colors have gone very drab, but that big black saddle is still there. And this one is probably less than an inch. This is a fairly young one. And juveniles like this usually aren't seen with the parents. That juvenile fish tend to hang out in really shallow water in places with more protection. So um, you learn certain places to look for them if you're trying to find juveniles. Um, this one is called a barred rabbit fish. And barring refers to the thin vertical lines on it. So quite colorful up close. From further away, it's just kind of a bluish yellow with the dark bar through the eye and on the front of it. But in any case, the juveniles, again, vaguely reminiscent of the color of the adult. We have lots of barring, but the pattern is different. The colors are somewhat different. Um, Shape is similar, but again, a little bit different as well. So we see this again and again, juveniles that are kind of like the adults, but there are differences. And enough differences that sometimes you see a juvenile fish and you're like, what is that going to grow into? So here's an example of a juvenile. what? Well, I won't literally ask you guys to guess what it's going to be. That's too difficult over Zoom. But this is one that looks nothing like the adult. I'll tell you, it's an angelfish. And if you've ever looked at large aquariums in a restaurant or lobby, it's a popular fish to have on display. This is an emperor angelfish juvenile. It's going to turn into this. So almost nothing in common between the pattern or color of the two. Um, that the adult gets to be over a foot long. It's a big and flashy fish. The juveniles are striking in their own way, but a very different color pattern. Um, so this looks somewhat similar to what we just saw as the juvenile emperor angel. That one had circles on the body. This one has semicircles. And that's the clue to what it's going to turn into. This juvenile is a semicircle angelfish, and this is what the adult looks like. So I've chosen a bunch of angelfishes to show because they have more striking patterns. Um, but this kind of change isn't unusual. Sometimes you find a fish midway between changing from the juvenile to the adult colors. I don't think I included any photos of that, but that can be interesting. Um, Other fish are really completely different. So this is a juvenile. Um, this is something that's sold in the aquarium trade. If you go to a pet store that has aquarium fish, you sometimes see these sold as dragon wrasses. Um, I've seen these as small as an inch long, up to 2 or 3 inches, before they start to change into something that looks more like the adult. So this one has patterning on the body. It has all these long fins that stick out in different directions. It's a kind of confusing pattern that tries to hide where the eye is. It's going to grow up to be this. The adult is known as a rock mover wrasse and is named for the behavior. These guys spend all day picking up small rocks in their mouths and moving them to see if anything tasty was hiding underneath it. And very different pattern, different behavior than the juveniles. Um, Another example of something that's completely different. It's a little hard to tell what you're looking at here. This is a tiny ball the size of a pea that's black with white spots on it. It's a tiny juvenile fish. And so right now it's almost a round shapeless ball. There are fins, but they're transparent and really hard to see. It's going to grow up into this odd shaped thing. This is called a smooth trunk fish. Um, this is a fish of the Caribbean. See, I don't only dive in the South Pacific. We have some Caribbean fish here too. So yes, the dark with white spots carries through, but there's a lot more going on in the adult. And so yeah, the change from juvenile to adult can take on a lot of different forms, like a lot of different ways. Um, Another way that fish change, this one is called the blue ribbon eel. It's a small moray eel that are always a crowd pleaser when they're seen. If we're going to dive somewhere where they're found, the dive guides will always point them out. And they're often called blue ribbon eels, although they're not only blue. Occasionally you see one that's yellow, like this. Exact same shape, but yellow without the blue. And sometimes more frequently than the yellow ones, you see them black, like this. So again, the same shape, but this is black with yellow on the back. It turns out the black ones are juveniles. And the blue ones are adult males. The yellow ones are female. For whatever reason, we see a lot more males than females. But a lot of people don't realize these are all the same species of eel. And so this is for the adults, that would be called sexual dimorphism. It just means the males and females look different. Um, a lot of fish, there are subtle differences, but some like this, there are big differences. Um, Another example of that, this pair of fish, these are actually the same species. This is the scalefin anthias, or a pair of them. The orange one in the center is the female, and the purplish one is the male. And so they look very different. These are an extremely common fish. So like the photo I opened with 1,000 fish on the reef, probably a third of the fish in it were these. And whenever you see large groups of orange or purple fish, it's usually these. Um, the younger adults tend to hang out in single sex groups. You, you can see large numbers of females together, of males together. Um, as they mature, you tend to find a male will try to control a harem of females. And so all the all the time, males will try to maintain an area that a territory that's theirs, and a group of females, and chase other males away. This isn't just at spawning time, but that's what they do. There are a number of fish that form harems like that. Um, Another fish, this we're back to angelfish. This one is called a black spot angel, and this is the female. Fairly striking pattern. The male, you wouldn't know it's the same species, not just different colors, but completely different pattern, the zebra stripes. And yeah, the name black spot angel puzzled me for a long time. It's a little hard to see in this photo, but right here on the breast is a black spot, and that's what it's named for. I don't know who came up with that name. It's certainly not the most obvious feature. But so here, the males and females are very different. And speaking of males and females, now I'm going to focus on a particular group of fish whose life cycle is just a little more complicated. So egg larvae and juvenile here are like what I first described, but the adults have two phases, referred to as initial phase and terminal phase. For the most part, the initial phase is female and terminal phase is male. And in this group of fishes, they actually transition from female to male and change sex. Um, and it's not like they reach a certain age and it's time to make that change. These changes are controlled by social cues that um, and a fish can change in just a couple weeks. Most wrasses, the same way the Anthias I showed you earlier, I mentioned that males keep harems. This is true of wrasses as well. So there tend to be fewer males than females. Um, Also, I say the initial phase is usually female because sometimes there are functional males that look like females so that they can sneak into a harem to mate with the females there. So it all gets very complicated. And that's why we generally shy away from calling these male and female and say initial phase and terminal phase. But enough with the biology. So this pattern is juvenile of a clown wrasse. Um, it's so the most obvious thing of the two orange spots with the when you have a dark spot with a white ring around it, like on top of those two orange spots, those are referred to as ocelluses or ocelli, I guess. False eye spots are what those are. And that's just to confuse predators and make them think, oh, am I looking at the eyes of something larger? Maybe I shouldn't attack this. Um, a lot of juvenile fish have these. But this juvenile, here's one midway changing into adult colors. So those two false eye spots have largely disappeared from the back. The orange has become more diffuse. And this is what the initial phase adult looks like. So quite a bit different. But if I back up to here, you can still see that this had a gray back, a white bar in the middle, and a white front underneath those spots. But this is the initial phase. So probably female, but I'm not sure if this species has males that sneak in that way or not. But this is the terminal phase. So um, for wrasses, the terminal phase usually has more color, um, larger, often longer fins. but noticeably different. So when you're learning to identify fish when it comes to wrasses, you have to learn 3 different color patterns for each wrasse: the juvenile, the initial, and the terminal. And it's not just confusing for us hobbyists trying to figure out what we're looking at. Scientists have actually been known to think they were describing a new species when they've accidentally just found a different phase of a fish that's already well known. Um, Another example that this one is a juvenile of what's called a yellowtail wrasse. The name yellowtail will make sense when you see the adults, but here you have a fairly striking pattern, orange with these black bordered white spots. This is this juvenile is probably pretty small, maybe an inch, inch and a half long. So here it is mid-transition. You still have those black bordered white spots and largely orange body, but now the tail has turned yellow. There's a spattering of blue towards the rear, and it's moving towards this. So this is the initial phase of a yellowtail wrasse. Now the name makes sense. It's got its yellowtail. So yeah, I've included some transitional shots there. That pattern tends to only exist a fairly short time. Um, when wrasses change from one phase to another, it's hormone driven, but it often happens in only a few weeks. So it's not common to see the transitional individuals like that. But so if you remember, we started with this, we've gone to this initial phase. Terminal phase is similar. Larger, color is darker, and now we have this pattern on the face, a green bar in the middle. And yeah, for this part of the wrasse family, that's probably a pretty typical transition. This is another wrasse, but this one is called checkerboard wrasse. Here, the juvenile doesn't have the kind of striking pattern we saw in the others. The blotchy black and white is to blend in with the kind of rubbly rocks it likes to swim around, but it does have a false eye spot on top. So if something notices it, they're going to be, what's this big eye looking at me? And eye spots must work to deter predators because a lot of fish have them like this. But this is what the young juveniles look like in checkerboard wrasses. Here's the initial phase. So the name checkerboard comes from the pattern on the body of the black and white. Occasionally it's a more obvious squares, but this is probably more typical. So we have some yellow fins and face, the checkerboard pattern on the body of the initial phase. Eventually it'll reach terminal phase. So terminal phase again is similar to the initial phase, but now you kind of have dark on the rear of the body, white in the middle. The face has much more pronounced red lines now. And again, also a larger fish. Here's another wrasse just to point out that the change isn't always that dramatic. This is called a 3-spot wrasse. Although you only see one spot on this one, this orange spot on the tail. A young 3-spot wrasse. And the intermediate 3-spot wrasse, that spot on the tail has gotten much darker, but it's otherwise a fairly similar pattern. It's just the pink lines are on the face are more obvious. The tail spot got darker. Oh, whoops. I'm sorry. I am missing the terminal phase of that. I didn't make it into the slideshow. there would be another spot that develops here in the terminal phase. I'm sorry that I missed getting that photo into the slideshow, but this just shows sometimes the changes are subtle. This is a very common fish throughout the Indo-Pacific, called a moon wrasse. The juvenile um, has this kind of multicolored body with these pale spots across the back and two dark spots. As you go from juvenile to initial phase, you kind of lose the pale spots on the back, but it's otherwise fairly similar. And when that goes on to terminal phase, the colors intensify, you get yellow in the tail. But so, yeah, the changes can be more subtle. They're not always dramatic. Wrasses are a huge family that vary quite a bit. So just to show you a somewhat different sort of wrasse, this is a flasher wrasse. I'm not even sure which one. There are probably 40 or 50 different flasher wrasses. A small juvenile going to an initial phase, which is fairly drab, but has some pattern to it. That's what this is going to grow up to be. Now, this is clearly a terminal phase male. They don't always look like this. The reason they're called flasher wrasses is when they're trying to express dominance to control their harem or keep other wrasses out of their territory, they will suddenly flare their fins and intensify their colors. It's where the name flasher comes from, that they'll flash at other fish like this. So this photo has caught that, which is challenging to photograph because it often lasts less than a second. They swim around in circles and will suddenly pause, flash like that, and then go back to swimming in circles. But only the terminal males have these intense colors like this. And how are we doing on time? Okay, wow. This is actually going quickly. This is not my photo. In fact, this is courtesy of Pixar. You probably recognize this as a shot from the movie Finding Nemo. As we've been talking about fish growing up and changing, I know it'll come as a shock, but the biology shown in Finding Nemo is completely wrong. Clownfish, like the wrasses, go through a sex change, but in the other direction. You have eggs and larvae. Rather than juvenile, we generally call them immature. In clownfish, they look just like tiny adults. When they mature, they become male, and some of the males will change to female eventually. So it's in the opposite direction. Other differences between this and the other fish we talked about, the eggs aren't microscopic and float with the plankton. The eggs are certainly large enough to see and are attached to rocks on the reef. Although the larvae are generally mostly transparent. But when the larvae settle down to become the juveniles or immatures, they will find an anemone to join. Every anemone with a family grouping of clownfish, the largest, most dominant fish is female. The second largest, the subdominant, is male, and all the others are immature. The female will not tolerate another female in their anemone, and the male won't tolerate another male. So there's always only one of each. If something happens to the female, the male will in a fairly short time, less than a week, become female. Will move up the hierarchy. Um, when there's an opening for a male, one of the immature ones will become male. So it's a one-way transition. Once a clownfish has become male, it can't go back. Once it's become female, it can't go back to male. But these changes happen based on social cues, and they happen fairly quickly. And a lot of it is about who's dominant. So they very much maintain a pecking order. So if you remember in the animated movie Finding Nemo, something has happened to mom, and dad is trying to raise the young clownfish. But but of course, here if something happened to mom, dad would become mom for the next generation. Um, the young don't generally venture out into the bigger ocean and will eventually become male. It's a very different life cycle. Um, but to get onto the pictures, which I think is why everyone's here. Um, so these are clownfish shot on the Great Barrier Reef, which is actually the only place this particular species of clownfish of anemone fish is found. So and the one in the center is very large, probably female. It's a little hard to tell from this shot if the smaller one behind it is the male or an immature. Um, so these are actually a different species, what are often called false clownfish, but there are probably 40 or 50 different kinds of anemone fish, which tend to all be, for the most part, orange with some white bars. So they're all similar. The differences are often very subtle. Um, and behavior wise, they all are fairly similar. So I'm going to illustrate their life cycle with photos of a number of different kinds of anemone fish. But here, the fish in the center is largest, is female. The one above it would be male, this second largest. And the one on the bottom, you notice, doesn't have a little bit of black trim on the fins, which is, besides size, is another way you can tell it's immature. That generally the younger fish don't have as complete a color pattern to them. Um, these are known as pink anemone fish, although the color it's sometimes pink, it's often more of a peachy color. But you notice the white bar is a little bit different on these. Um, this is a male and female in the process of laying eggs. So the female is laying eggs on the rock right below the anemone. And when she's done, you end up with a patch of 100 or so tiny little eggs. Each one is smaller than a grain of rice by a little bit. So like a 32nd of an inch long. Um, they all start orange. And they take roughly 2 weeks to hatch. Um, so the orange ones are freshly laid. These are ones that are getting close to hatching. Again, these are photos that I took on the reef out in the South Pacific. So trying to get really close to get pictures of the eggs like this, I was being attacked by the parents while shooting this. That they don't like anyone getting close to their eggs. But so in these, you can see the eyes of the developing embryos in the eggs, that they go from orange to transparent. These still have fairly large yolk sacs, the kind of orangish spot below the eyes in each one of these, so they're not that close to hatching yet, maybe halfway through. Um, oh, these aren't in the ideal order, but so this is more pink anemone fish, a larger grouping. So Um, to the right, the larger two would be the female in front and the male behind. And there are 5 additional fish that are smaller here. Those would all be immature. And if things are really stable in the population and no predator gets them, those immatures can stay that way for a year or more. It's not like, oh, they're a couple months old, it's time to become adult. Um, it's it's all social cues that determine when that transition happens. So unless um, one of the out, mature adults disappears, the others will just stay immature in that way. Um, if anemone fish don't venture very far from their home anemone, um, often no more than 6 or 8 feet that I've seen. But if they discover an anemone nearby that isn't being inhabited by anemone fish, then some of the immatures might move there and in short order mature. So once you start to recognize the family pattern, every time you see multiple anemone fish in anemone, you can pick them out. The large one's female, the one hiding behind is male, the smaller ones would be immature. And again, so yes, I have a lot of pictures of this particular species of anemone fish because they're probably the most common one I see both in Fiji and the Solomon Islands, which are two of the places I've dived a lot. Um, in this one, it's likely that the fish in front is the female, although it's not clear if the male is in this shot. The others all appear pretty small. But the female is not just large, she's also the most aggressive, very much the dominant fish. And if as a photographer she thinks I'm getting too close, um, she'll come out and threaten to bite me. Um, again, the mouth is really tiny. It's not like she's actually going to hurt me, but she will do everything she can to defend her home. So this photo, very different, was shot in an aquarium in my house that I used to have. Um, I at one time I had mini aquaria, and well, I had a reef tank with live coral in my office. We had at various times 2 or 3 other tanks with fish in them. Um, so this is a pair of what were known as marine anemone fish. Um, I decided that I wanted to try my hand at raising um, these fish. That anemone fish are among the easiest of saltwater fish to raise because their eggs are fairly large and they don't float with the plankton. So to try and raise them, I needed a mated pair. I needed a male and a female. And you may wonder how you end up knowing you've gotten a male and a female. Well, it turns out, given the pattern that as they grow up, one will become male and eventually female. Um, what I did, the larger one, the one on the left here, I had for probably a year when I decided I wanted to try raising them. I went to a pet store and bought another fish of the same species, which is the smaller one you see on the right. By having a large one and a small one together in a tank, I just let nature take its course, and the large one became female and the smaller one became male. It probably took most of a year after introducing the second one before they started spawning. But they spawned and laid eggs in the aquarium. Unfortunately, I don't have photos of all the steps on that, but just to show the eggs did hatch. Um, they start almost transparent and about a quarter the size of this. Um, so this is as the fish was going from that larval phase to immature and starting to look like a miniature adult. And you can see this one is about a quarter-inch long. So really tiny fish. And I had to put the babies separate from the tank the parents were in because the parents actually will eat the babies. Um, this is part of why when the eggs hatch, um, the eggs may be laid on a rock and cared for by the parents who try and stop predators from eating them and such. But as soon as they hatch, the baby fish, which are called fry at that age, um, very quickly leave, and they will spend a week or two floating with the plankton as larval fish. Um, and I didn't get photos of that stage because they're tiny and transparent and really hard to photograph. But yeah, after 2 or 3 weeks like that, they start to look like miniature adults. And oh, sorry, that is the last photo. So that is my talk.
Well, thank you, Mark. Does anybody have any questions or comments, or you'll have to unmute yourself?
Wow, that was really great. Really enjoyed that. Uh, and those anemone are interesting in and of themselves. You talked a lot about wrasses. What about barbers? Are they as common?
Barbers. I'm not sure what a barber is in relation to a fish.
I saw some of those at Cabo San Luca.
Oh, barber fish is a species of surgeonfish.
Okay. My big question is, it seems like a lot of warm water and warm environment animals. You think of parrots and morpho butterflies and these fish. They are so colorful. Why is it that we don't have those in the northern hemisphere?
Um, right. As a rule of thumb, animals are larger towards the poles and less colorful. And part of it is thought to have to do with diversity and competition. There's less less diversity in temperate areas than there is in tropical. That part of all the color is being noticed in a very complex, busy environment.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas in temperate areas, it tends to be less with less diversity, there's less complexity, less competition.
Oh. I had a question.
Yeah, Parrish.
Hi. Um, I absolutely love the lines on a lot of the faces. I thought, God, people should study that for, carnival painting things. But do they have any idea, I don't know why that the fish have those beautiful line markings around the face?
Right. So probably about half of the wrasses have labyrinthine markings on the face, generally in pink or purple. Um, I don't know that I have no idea why,
Yeah.
but I do know that the markings are very consistent.
Hmm.
So when you're trying to figure out what species a particular fish is, the exact curves and lengths of those different lines are consistent across the species.
Huh.
So, because sometimes you'll find an individual that's darker or paler than most examples of its species. So just looking at overall colors, it's confusing what you're looking at. And then you have to actually look at the subtleties of those line markings on the face to try and figure out which one it is. But I don't know why they're there, if they
Great.
serve a purpose or not.
Thank you.
In terms of the coloration, what we're seeing is a reflection of light. We're not seeing the fish glowing, as in the case with some animals that have phosphorescence. Is that right?
Right. So, there certainly are a number of fish that oh, forget the word for it. It's not phosphorescence. Well, there actually are fish that glow. Flashlight fish being an example of that.
Mhm.
But a number of fish, um, oh, it's driving me batty. I've forgotten the word for it. Um, reflect back light at a different frequency than what's shines on it. So they create neon colors like that. But right, so my underwater photography, I've got strobe lights on the camera that are so it's well lit with white light. And what you see while diving before you put lights on things tends to be much duller, just because there's not a lot of light once you get deeper than 15 or 20 feet.
Yeah, I remember growing up with neon tetras and cardinal tetras and loving the flashiness of those. I'm not sure where they fit in the world scheme of things.
Um, Actually, since you asked, oops, so this is a flashlight fish.
Mm.
This is what it looks like with strobe lights on it. And that pale yellow area under the eye is the light emitting organ. So that's what it looks like in the dark.
Wow.
That area actually glows and produces light. And they're very challenging to photograph because they like to only swim in total darkness. And as soon as you
Mm.
put lights on them, they disappear.
Mm.
But I did manage to get a few shots of one.
Wow.
Mark, did you discuss your equipment and your lights and how you swim with all that? And
Oh,
are you diving with tank or just snorkel?
with the scuba tank.
Scuba.
Right. Let's see. I can find it. Or I may not be able to. Oh, here we go. So, oops. So
Mhm.
that's me underwater. So yeah,
Mhm.
I'm on full scuba rig. There's a tank on my back, a regulator in my mouth, and
Wow.
of course the camera rig is partly obscured here because
Mhm.
it's down in this coral, but you see the strobes on there. Let's see. I know I've got that. Oops. Oh, somewhere here. There should be. That's Jody, by the way, with the stuffed ferret.
Yeah.
Okay, I have pictures of divers. I thought I had another picture of me with my rig, but
When you were
didn't
immersed
come
in
up
the
in the search.
anemone, weren't you concerned about being stung by the
But
anemone?
this,
Yeah.
so this is a soft coral. It's not an anemone,
Oh, okay.
and it doesn't sting at all. It's really silky smooth. It feels really interesting. This is a dive site called Kansas because the whole top of this balmy is covered in this stuff that looks a little like the way it moves in the current, like fields of grain.
Wow. So we're just used to seeing the skeleton of the coral.
So, well, some corals have a stony skeleton and some don't. This is a soft coral. There is no skeleton.
Oh my God. So interesting.
And as a general rule, you shouldn't touch anything while diving, both for the safety of the creatures and yourself. A lot of things will sting or bite. And a lot are very delicate and you can easily damage them. I've spent enough time studying stuff to have some sense of what can safely be touched, which is why I'm down amongst this coral. This is one I know isn't really a problem for either of us. And you can tell there are a lot of other divers around. You see all the bubbles in the background. The rest
Yes.
of them are just below that ridge.
Mhm. Yeah, you want to especially stay away from poking your finger in a crevice. You might get an eel attached to your finger.
Yes, and if you notice all the eel pictures I showed, the eels had their mouths open. It's not because they're trying to be menacing and showing their teeth. Um, they breathe through their mouths.
Hmm.
So at rest, they almost always have their mouths open. And but if you happen to stick your finger in an eel's mouth without noticing it's there, this is very bad because their teeth are needle sharp and all point inward. You can't pull your hand back out of the mouth, not without destroying the eel or your finger or both.
Wow.
Wow.
So yes, you really don't want to end up in an eel's mouth.
And you want to avoid coral, not, so much to avoid damaging, which is a problem as well, but you can get skin infections from abrasions.
Yeah, I mean, if people are interested, I could talk a lot about diving. It's not generally dangerous, but there are things you have to watch out for, including just having open cuts because there's a lot of bacteria and other stuff on the reef, and any small injuries tend to get infected. Um, so it's part of why I always wear a full wetsuit, even if it's warm water. Less likely to have any exposed skin that can be injured, or if I have an injury that's going to get touched by anything.
Thank you,
Well,
Mark.
thank you, Mark. This has been a really interesting discussion. And I will hope that we see many of you next month when Richard will be talking about his trip to the Galapagos, and that'll be on March 13th, which is the second Thursday. So we look forward to seeing you all then.